judgment and your professional autonomy. Okay, let's take a look now at the blank template and see how that works. Before we do that, I'd like to just take a serious look here at what we call a holistic rubric. I didn't fill this all in, it just gives you an idea. To get an A, really neat, both name and date, 2 hand-drawn illustrations and so on. To get a B, to get a C, to get a D, whatever. These are pretty good. I mean, they give kids an idea of where to go to get an A, how to get a B, how to get a C. Problem lies, of course, when we start marking them. It rarely works out that a student's going to get everything in the A, or just everything isolated in the B, or just everything isolated in the C. And so what happens is you have some from A, some from B, 1 or 2 from C, and so on. Well, what do? Do you average it and say, well, I guess that's a B? That becomes very confusing. Now the thing is, what we do is we get confused between must-haves or Gibbons, and that makes things really complicated. So let's take a look here at, if you look on page 12, you can see in the top corner here we have what we have must-haves, we have criteria written down the side, and so what is the difference? Okay, so what's the difference between criteria and must-haves? We might ask kids to do an assignment where they're going to write a letter to the mayor to convince them about homelessness or poverty or any big issue or big topic. We might ask the kids to make that letter to the mayor or to the prime minister. We might say it has to be neat. It has to be fluent. We want it to flow beautifully. It has to be 2 pages and no more than 2 pages and no less. Maybe we're going to ask them to do it typed. Maybe we say we want it to be convincing. You are writing a letter. This is a really important letter. It has to be convincing. You must use convincing words and phrases and examples from the past and so on to convince the prime minister or mayor to make some changes. You might include an ad that they have to do, and it has to be on poster-sized paper, and this ad's going to be sent as well to the mayor or the prime minister. And you might also want the kids to have this assignment deep, that they're really thinking through, they're giving solid examples that have meaning to them, they're not just whipping this off quickly. And maybe you're going to ask the kids to put their name and date on it. Well, I think the right-hand column is criteria, deep, fluent, convincing. And I think the left-hand column might be what we call must-haves, neat, name, date, typed, 2 pages, and so on. So if you look in the top corner of your template on page 12, you'll see here that we can write these things into those 4 bullets. Now, I would suggest 2, 3, or 4, but I wouldn't have more than 4. It gets really overwhelming for kids if they have 4 things there. Okay, let's take a look. What's the difference between must-haves and criteria? Well, I'm going to give you a little hint before we play this game. And the hint is that if it's a must-have, they must have those things in their assignment or it gets handed back. Okay? So name and date, poster size, and 2-page paper attached. That's what they have to have. So the ad has to be poster size, 2 pages typed, name and date, and so on. Okay, so let's try this out. So let's say you get the assignment. Okay? You get the assignment and it's only 1 page long. Do you take marks off, right? Or do you hand it back? Hand it back because it's a must-have. Let's say there's no name. Do you take marks off or do you hand it back? Hand it back. How about, you get it? It's not really creative. It's deep and logical, but that's not really creative, right? That ad wasn't really, what do? Well, you mark it because it's part of the criteria. It's not on poster paper. Student, let's say, hands it to you on a piece of lined paper. They tore it out of their book. Not on poster paper. You hand it back. Right. And what if it's really deep? You read it and it's like, wow, these examples, they're really convincing. This is fantastic. You mark it. Question now, how do you set criteria? How do you set criteria? If you want to take a look at the must-have section over again, that's on page 14 and 15 in the book. And now I'm going to look at page 16. Now, how do you set criteria? It's actually quite simple because you do this all the time. In the back of your mind, I mean, I know some of sometimes you are explicit to the kids, of course you are. But sometimes it's in the back of my mind and I have to think, okay, wait a minute. I just said to the kids, make the poster good. Like, pretend I'm marking out of 10. So you might say, well, I am marking out of something. And I did say to the kids, make the poster good. So isn't that explicit? Not really. Because what does good mean? Well, you might mean you want the poster to be eye-catching. You might mean you want it to be on topic. You might mean you want it to be clear. Let's say you say something in math like, let's get into some real problem solving. Well, what do you mean by real problem solving? You might mean it has to be accurate. You might mean you want to see 2 or 3 strategies, and you might mean you want to see kids representing their learning. Well, if you say don't just write a summary of what you just read in the novel, write a good response, you might mean you want it to be thoughtful, relevant, clear. If you say to kids, sort those objects really well, you might mean you want kids to come up with strategies. You want them to be accurate, not just throwing things into a pile at random, and make sense. So those are some things there. Think about the words you use in class. Good, real problem solving, effective, powerful. I want it to be neat. I want it to be this. I want it to be that. Well, what do you mean by that? What's really underlined good or excellent or whatever? What does that mean? So just thinking that through. And I provided on page 17 a list for you of criteria, page 17, page 18, page 19. On page 19 I have some blank spaces for you there. You can add your own because sometimes kids come up with amazing criteria that I haven't thought of. And so what you can do then is write your criteria here. That's for you, and I would pick 2 or 3. I wouldn't do any more than 3 because it gets very, very overwhelming for kids. So using the descriptors on the list, page 17, 18, and 19, write them in the spaces provided, and then you can start to think of some descriptors. Okay, so you can see some examples here. I've got some in the book, at the back of the book, what descriptors might look like. What I would suggest right here is to write the descriptors at a 3 level. So keeping it positive, because it's at a 3, it means it's true. So in this example, you know, my poster and 2-page essay shows that I really understand how specific life forms interact with their environments. For example, feeding behavior, mimicry, etc. So I'm giving some examples of what deep might be, things they might choose to work on. I can predict adaptive changes that occur. I haven't rushed this, and so on. It's totally up to you what you want to do with this. But again, writing it at a 3 level. Now, which one of these criterion are more important than the others? And so, for example, under deep, I might have said 2. So I put a 2 here. Under creative, 1. Under logical, 1. So deep is worth 8 because 4 times 2 is 8. Creative is worth 4. Logical is worth 4. 8 plus 4 plus 4 equals 16. Make sure the criteria focuses on the things needed to show the outcome in a powerful way. Okay, so criterion won't be poster size or 2-page paper or name and date. That's something that we're expecting from the kids. This is out of 16, so you can see at the bottom it says total out of 16 for student, total out of 16 for partner, total of 16 for teacher. Of course, that doesn't mean that we're going to have students mark themselves every single time and peers mark them every single time either. It's totally depending on what you want to do. You can do all 3, but maybe not. It's totally up to you. All right, let's move on to take a look at scaling it. If it's out of 16, then you'll need to decide as a class, well, what does a 4 look like? Well, in this example, and again, this is hypothetical, maybe 14 to 16 if you get that on your paper or your project, that it's an exceeding. If you get between 10 and 13, it's fully meeting, and so on. It's totally up to you. Some teachers say, no, they have to get 16 to get exceeding, and so on. It's totally up to you and your professional autonomy. This will be important, this bottom piece, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and how that all works. Okay, so there you go.